Psychological space. This goes back to when I was a student in the University of Washington, second year, 1967. And the teacher said, make an 8 by 8 by 8 cube and make it do everything. You have to live there, you have to work there. You know, so all the students go back to their desk and we made models in those days. And you know, everyone was trying to make a bed that would fold up into a work table and all that. And I remember I drew this huge cloud-like shape over my cube, and I titled that psychological space. And I turned that in and I said, that's the space that you need, not the space inside that functionalist cube. And they really didn't like that. So I was the thorn in their side from the beginning, but I still think this word has, especially on the urban scale, very important dimensions. And I'm trying to articulate this, and I haven't quite finished. I mean, when you have, for example, a slice of the sky, what that does to the space that you're occupying. This is a slice of the naked sky. This happens to be from a project on ill-signal and Paris competition we lost. But there's something about the quality of the blue sky, the cloud moving over, that makes this a kind of psychological space. Of course, we have to use the word flow. Well, because everyone uses the word flow, and I used it in a text in 1990, so I'm trying to avoid it because it's all overused, and yet it's what our world is about. Flux and the ephemeral. I mean, today, 90% of everything that we communicate on the internet flows in these undersea broadband with cables. They're no bigger than your finger, by the way, if you ever do the research. It's an enormous amount of information going in a cable, no bigger than your finger. And now that I'm connecting to China all the time, we run all our files over there, I study this a little bit, and it's quite scary, actually. But the idea that this flux and this ephemerality needs to lead to a temporary architecture is to me something of an anomaly. I don't believe that. I believe that, in fact, and I have something to read, the flux of information, the circulatory flows of a hypermobile population, the flows of materials and products constantly dissolve and disperse the 21st century metropolis. This fluidization of life in the metropolis, while changeable and directionally mutable in its transient turbulence, need not be equivocated in an ephemeral architecture. The solidity of an open architecture which can adopt to change and flow, like a rock canyon or material. I lost that view. So, like a rock canyon where the water flows and it rises and it goes down. And the fact is that 50% of the waste material today is construction waste, buildings that are being torn down and discarded. So as architects, I feel like this notion of temporary architecture needs to be replaced by a new way of thinking about the flexibility of the solid architecture. Banalization and qualitative power. You know, there's a kind of quality of the banal that's very, let's say, trendy right now. You know, we don't want to use the word junk space, but there's a kind of trendiness to this that I worry about in school and as a teacher at Columbia. And I think that certainly there's a density that has to be built and realized in metropolitan ways that we never thought of before. But I think that the generic city is the wrong idea. I think that the idea of that architects somehow orchestrate junk space is the wrong idea. And I think, for example, for a great example of someone who doesn't do that, Oscar Niemeyer in Copan in Sao Paulo, and I visited it a couple of times, and it's built in 1951, by the way, and it's incredibly alive and working and well done and dense and amazing. And down below it is a very well worked out series of shops and spaces that cascade through the wave of the building above, the sunscreens, and the way this building works. This is an example that I mean, this is certainly not a junk space building. I mean, this is an example of a way to make a very dense, very large piece of architecture, and it's already 58 years old. Negative capability. I have to find the quote on this one. I'm working in China, so we have dust storms. Right now, it's like this in Beijing because the drying out of the Gobi Desert picks up, the wind picks up this dust, this sand. And the month of March is terrible. But you have to deal with it. And I think as an urbanist, you need to take on some kind of attitude that you can get optimistic and try to find ways. Several things dovetailed in my mind, and at once it struck me. What quality went to form a man of achievement, especially in literature, and which Shakespeare possessed so enormously? I mean, negative capability. That is, when a man is capable of being in uncertainties, mysteries, doubts, without any irritable reaching after fact or reason. John Keats, 1817. So that's a kind of, let's say, okay, traffic jams in Beijing. You can only have one appointment in Beijing, because if you have two, it would take 2 days. To get it, if you have an appointment across the city, the subway system is inadequate, and it's a very, very big city, and you just get stuck in traffic. It makes LA look like a dream. Beijing is, so this is going on more and more. The last category is fusion, the notion of fusing landscape, architecture, and urbanism. And the possibility that certain projects especially lend for this possibility. Like this was a urban park in Seoul, Korea, where they had a very large convention center and quite a bit of program, but they also wanted to create a park and save this white line as a kind of a ghost of the old Korean wall. So our project was to make a three-dimensional park, a park that was like a kind of woven condition where there were courtyards and there was program, but there was greenery. In fact, the vertical part is also a park with various kind of flora and fauna that are part of the whole public network. So the program was achieved and a park was achieved by fusing all the requirements of the urbanistic, the landscape, and the architectural. And another project which I think does this, and I'm not going to show in detail because it's been published everywhere, is the museum in Kansas City, where we're parking 500 cars, we're dealing with an existing building, but we're fusing the buildings into the landscape and causing a building which is 840 feet long that creates a series of garden sculpture courts and windows onto the existing sculpture garden and bringing light down to the main space.